Hi guys, I'd like to talk about the Treaty of Versailles to World War II. World War I ended with the Treaty of Versailles, and it was signed after Germany and the other alliance countries between Italy, Austria, and Germany were just failed to invade France. Most of the war was fought here north of Paris at the Western Front, and they just ran out of resources, ran out of manpower, and they ended up having to force for a peace. The Treaty of Versailles was the treaty that many people say started World War II because the Treaty of Versailles was signed right after the war, and it ended the war, and there were many changes after World War I. This had been so-called the war to end all wars. There were countries that were really wanting punishment for the countries that started this. So who was to blame for World War I? Who was to rebuild? Who would pay to rebuild Europe? Well, the blame, according to the countries making the treaty, was Germany. Now, you may remember that Germany was not involved in the original conflict. The original conflict was between Serbia here and Austria-Hungary, but because of alliances that Germany had with Austria-Hungary, Germany invaded France, who had an alliance with Russia, who had an alliance with Britain. All the alliances kicked in, and that's why you had these invasions and fightings away from Serbia and Austria-Hungary. Germany would lose territory, accept guilt, and pay money for all the other countries' war debt. And that money that was the war reparations was a cool $33 billion, which Germany did not have. Let's take a look over here at this map after World War I. The Treaty of Versailles and other treaties after that had Germany losing territory. You can see Germany here is smaller than it is here. And another country that lost territory was Russia. Now, Russia would end up, after the Russian Revolution, being called the Soviet Union, or USSR. If you do say the word Russia in correspondence to USSR, Russia was the largest territory in the USSR. So I might end up calling the USSR Russia. So I'll call them Russia. Russia ended up losing a lot of territory also. All of these countries here were formed out of this area lost from Germany and Russia. Now, why Russia was on the winning side? Why did Russia end up losing so much territory? Well, they end up backing out of the war early because of the Russian Revolution. So when the forming of the Treaty of Versailles, which is in Versailles, France, was where it was signed, they did not invite anyone from Germany, and they did not invite anyone from Russia. And consequently, they're the group that lost so much territory. Also, you can see Austria-Hungary was pretty much just broken up. Austria-Hungary ended up as three countries. Italy kind of ended up being about the same. This Treaty of Versailles was a harsh peace, a really harsh peace. Germany hadn't even lost territory in World War I. In World War I, they invaded, and the war stopped before anybody invaded Germany. And Russia wasn't any stop to Germany. Germany, in fact, was making grounds on Russia. So a lot of Germans were upset that they ended up losing territory even when they had not lost territory during the war. But anyway, Germany faced many years of economic crisis after World War I. They had the burden of paying the $33 billion debt. There was huge unemployment in Germany, and there was huge inflation. Germany ultimately was only able to pay about 10% of this debt. They just didn't have the resources. They overprinted their money to try to solve the inflation problem. Their currency is in marks, and in 1914, one US dollar equaled 4 marks. In 1919, $1 would equal 25 marks. So they printed a lot of marks, between 1914 and 1919, but they really went hog wild, to use an expression, after 1919. From 1919 to 1923, it really changed. One US dollar was equaled 4.3 trillion marks. And that's just ludicrous. It's just ludicrous to print that much money. I guess the assumption was that if you printed more money, that people would have more money. Sure, they had more money, but the price of things went up with the money that was printed. And it did not work at all. Actually, I guess it's 4.2 trillion. I read my notes wrong. Sorry about that. Well, you can imagine that people in Germany spent many unhappy years after the end of World War I. World War I and Treaty of Versailles was in 1918. And even into the 1930s, things were really, really struggling economically. And when times were good, the Nazi Party in Germany didn't really have many followers. Let me get to a different page. Talked about the German economy here, but the Nazi Party really didn't have many followers when times were good, but when times were bad, it turned out to have a lot more supporters. In 1933, Hitler, who was the leader of the Nazi Party, or the head of the Nazi Party, was elected as the leader of Germany. Now, he had been in the German army in World War I. When Hitler became in power in Germany, he suspended civil rights, he suspended the German Constitution, he made the Nazi Party the only legal party, he had ordered book burnings of anti-Nazi books. Why did the German people elect someone who suspended the Constitution and suspended liberties? Well, the answer is times were tough, and no other system had worked since World War I. 1918 through 1933 had been a miserable economic time in Germany. So I think the people of Germany were happy to have someone that seemed so resolute in having answers, even though those answers were probably not answers they would have normally supported. Well, anyway, the Nazi Party believed in something called fascism. Fascism is kind of a type of government. You know, we've talked about totalitarian government. Fascism is a totalitarian government, but it's run by the military. A military-run totalitarian government is basically what fascism is. Well, Hitler publicly blamed the Jews for the country's problem. You know, Germany had been blamed for the problems of Europe. They were blamed for World War I. So I think it was probably easier for Hitler to push off the blame on another group. German people did not want the blame, so it's probably easier to push the blame off. Hitler wanted to regain the territory lost in the Treaty of Versailles, plus some, and his tactic was through war. In 1938, Hitler overtook Austria. Now, what do you think the other countries did when he overtook Austria? Well, other countries did not want war. World War I had been so brutal, had been so bad for every country. None of the other countries really wanted to fight Germany over Austria. So they just let him have it. They did not come to the aid of Austria. Now, one thing Germany did do, they made an alliance with Italy. So they did not invade Italy. But they did invade Czechoslovakia, also in 1938. Germany invaded Czechoslovakia. Let's look at the map and see what we have here. So Germany overtook Austria. Germany overtook Czechoslovakia. And notice they're going east. The next target would be Poland. Now, a lot of people think that Hitler's ultimate goal was world domination through conquering Russia. A lot of historians think he was headed toward Russia, and he would later attack Russia, but fail, and we'll talk a little bit about that. In 1939, he overtook Poland But that is when other countries did start declaring war on him because they could see the pattern. He was taking over countries, and finally they just had to draw the line somewhere. So you did have countries like England and France here, which started declaring war on Germany once 1939 Poland was taken over. What did Russia do? Did Russia declare war on Germany? No. Russia ended up splitting part of Poland with Germany. See, Russia had been overtaken, or the Soviet Union had someone named Joseph Stalin in power. Stalin, it would turn out, would be probably more vicious than most of the czars in Russia. Well, anyway, we'll talk more about him. Stalin was a communist, and communism will be something we'll talk about a lot later on. In 1940, Germany turned their sights on France, and they overtook France without much trouble. But that is where Germany's success stopped. They tried their best to take over Britain, but the fact that Britain is an island just kept them from being invaded. Germany had to try to take them with air power. And by this time, Germany had taken over the smaller countries, the Netherlands, Belgium, Denmark, that even taken over Norway. So Germany had ended up taking over all this area in green right here. They owned most of Europe at the time. Tried to take over England, did not succeed because it was an island, and then they turned their sights on Russia, which may have been his ultimate goal in the first place. But you know what slowed them down? Polish mud. In 1941, it was the worst winter in a century in Russia. Snow and mud bogged them down as they traveled to get to the Soviet Union, and by the time they got there, it was very, very cold, and they were unable to take over Moscow, unable to take over Russia. Eventually, the United States entered the war. They did play a bigger part in winning this war for England and for themselves. Germany slowly would lose ground from both the eastern side and from both the western side. The Russian army would, of course, switch sides and be on the side of the United States and England. And in 1945, Hitler killed himself and Germany surrendered. The old countries, all these old countries, were given back their lands, except Germany was divided into two countries, East Germany and West Germany. I do have some questions for you. Number one, what was the name of the treaty that ended World War I? Number two, this treaty blamed what country for the war? Number three, who was elected leader of Germany in 1933? Number four, what is the term for a military-run totalitarian government? Number five, World War II began when Germany invaded where? This was in 1939. And number six, why did Germany fail to invade Russia? Hope you learned a little bit about this video on Treaty of Versailles to World War II.